I'm gonna take my mask off. You ready? Okay. My name is Carol Menkiti, and on behalf of my children and my husband, the spirit of my husband, I welcome you to this sacred place. And we are welcoming 3 long devoted people to the store. It's going to be a very special reading. So thank you for coming, and I know you will enjoy every bit of it. So enjoy the evening, and welcome to you on Zoom.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome tonight's guests. The readers are George Kalogeris, Richard Fein, and we'll have an audio recording of David Ferry. It's very exciting. George and Richard are friends of they're friends of the Grolier, and we're very, very pleased to have them here again. So I'm going to introduce the readers all at once, and then they can read one after the other. Richard will read first. So Richard Fein has published 11 books of poetry, including Losing It. His book, Kafka's Ear, has won the Maurice English Award, and he's also published 3 books of his translations. So one of the books is a poet that Richard imagined, and he imagined this poet writing in Yiddish, and then he translated the Yiddish. So that's a very interesting thing to do. I don't think it's been done before. And then the selected poems of Yankev Glatshteyn, with everything we've got. And then he published the full Pomegranate, Poems of Avrom, I'm not going to pronounce the name right, but Sutzkever. And I'm not sure, Richard, is that the imaginary poet?
No, these 3 exist.
Okay. All right. And he has also published 3 books of prose. Robert Lowell, A Critical Study, The Dance of Leah, a memoir of Yiddish, Yiddish Genesis, personal essays. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. He taught at Hunter College and University of Puerto Rico before teaching many years at SUNY New Paltz, New York. And he also spent a year on a Fulbright in India teaching American literature. And he has read for the Grolier on more than one occasion, and we're really excited to have him back. So welcome, Richard. And George Kalogeris is also a great friend of the store. He has been very, very generous, donating lots of his first book, or one of the first books, which Camus, Carnets, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And he donated generously many copies, and it's out of print. And it was published by, I can't remember the name, Press Wafer, and the person who was the publisher, Bill Corbett of Press Wafer, is unfortunately no longer with us, and he didn't reprint the book. So my hope is that that book can somehow be reprinted, because it's a wonderful book, and it should be available. But he's here to read from his most recent book, which is Winthropos. And it's an exciting book. It melds the personal and the universal. So I think that's one of George's strengths, is talking about the personal and the universal. He is also the author of Guide to Greece, which was published by LSU, and a book of paired poems and translations, which is another beautiful book that was published by Antilever Press. And then, as I stated before, the poems based on the notebooks of Albert Camus. His poems and translations have been anthologized in Joining Music with Reason, chosen by Christopher Ricks. And that is a wonderful book. I have a copy of that book. I highly recommend it. And George has been teaching English literature and classics and translations at Suffolk University for many years. And he's still there as of this time, thinking about maybe semi-retirement. But I'm sure his students will be devastated. He's just been a wonderful, wonderful addition to Suffolk. And we couldn't be happier to have him here tonight. And then the next reader will be David Ferry. And unfortunately, he can't be here in person, but he is also dear, dear, dear to the store. He and the previous owner, Ifani, were very close friends and colleagues for many, many, many years. And I wish that Ifani could be here with us tonight. David Ferry is an acclaimed American poet, professor, and translator. His translations, which include some of the world's major works of poetry, are known for their fluency and grace. In addition to his lauded translations of the Odes of Horace and Virgil's The Eclogues, Georgics, and the Aeneid, among other works. Ferry is a prize-winning poet in his own right. His poetic works include Dwelling Places, Of No Country I Know, New and Selected, which was published in '99, and won the Lenore Marshall Prize. And he's also won the Bingham Poetry Prize and the Rebecca Johnson Bobbitt National Poetry Prize for Poetry from the Library of Congress, and was a finalist for the L.L. Winship Penn New England Award and the New Yorker Book Award. Bewilderment, New Poems and Translations, 2012, won the National Book Award for Poetry. And the Grolier also published Ellery Street, a beautiful book of David Ferry's poems. So thank you very much for coming. And again, welcome everybody, and welcome George and Richard and David on audio. Thank you.
Brief correction, George will be reading first.
Thank you so much for that moving, beautiful introduction, Elizabeth. It's great to be here. I can't walk into this sacred place, as Carol said, and not feel the warm embrace of Ifeanyi. And thank you, James. And it's wonderful for me to be reading with my dear friends, Richard and David, who to me are not only close friends, but masters of the craft. My book is called Winthropos, and it's based on the Greekified name that my immigrant father gave to the town where I grew up, Winthrop. So I'll read the opening poem, Winthropos. And if you get lost, Yodgaki, what will you do? I'll find some older people and tell them my name. Anything else? I'll tell them where I live. And where is that? 45 Locust Ave. And where is that? Winthrop. Then comes his vague, Winthrop, Yodgaki, Or is it Winthropos? Only now that I'm older than he ever was, and even in late middle age, wherever I am in my life, I still don't have the foggiest clue. Do I hear the rhyme? Obvious, unavoidable. It tells me the answer to the Sphinx's riddle is Anthropos, my father pulling my leg. It's called Baby Monitor. She's sound asleep, or her Alzheimer's is. I can hear each breath she takes through the monitor I keep on my desk, hooked up as it is to the one upstairs beside her bed. The kind of listening device that's used for keeping track of infants. The tremulous speaker could fit in the palm of your hand. A little green light pulses every time it picks up any trace of my mother's voice. Babble of baby talk and muffled whimpers. Those garbled bits expelled from her speech machine. Its plastic speaker propped all night on its stand, calling out softly some rhythmical, ruminant something, so automatic it might be dreaming out loud in my mother's oblivious voice. A sibylline machine that makes the incomprehensible clear. And please help her, and please guide him, and stop it from spreading to the kidneys, please, dear Lord. And make that enough to meet their mortgage payments. I'm privy to a prayer that no one else can hear, at least tonight. Some primal psalm where all are nameless, but none of them forgotten. And please, and please, and please, goes the little green pulsing light. The cover of my book has this image of honeycomb. And I'd like to read a poem that's called Honey. The Greek word for honey, meli, is very close to the word for singing. Honey, two parts. One, meli. To Winthrop it comes like a melody in a gallon jar. And ever so sweetly my cousin tells me, I brought it for you from Akuvos, unprocessed honey, straight from the village hives. Before I'm able to process what that means, my cousin Perry unscrews the airtight lid, meli, as in the mouth of an open jar that lavishes the tongue with a dripping spoonful of amber gold, as in the honeybees that swarmed to Pindar's open mouth as he slept in the shade of a sacred oak, sweet child who woke to the odes of praise with meli on his lips. My cousin was 7 when he fell from a tree and broke his arm in 2 places. The village doctor botched the job, and fearing infection and lacking the money to send him to Athens, his panicked parents called our house. As soon as my father hung up, but still talking village Greek, he said to my mother, let's bring the boy here to the Boston hospitals. But how? He can't just hop on a plane. He has to go through immigration, and that takes years. But you with your English can talk to the senator. Go to the State House The Kennedys love the Greeks. And there I am at 6 years old, listening to Ted Kennedy tell my mother how much he loved to dine at Anthony's Pier 4 and how he knows all the Greek waiters by name. 2. A month or so later, my cousin's right elbow is bent as stiff as a board as he arrives at our house in Winthrop, along with his younger brother, Peter. Light years later, as if it was all immured in Meli, my cousin Pericles holds out a jar of amber gold in his supple arms. His kids have kids. He's 66 and ready to hang up his wings as an Air Canada pilot. Airtight, the past congeals and uncongeals, heals and unheals. But Peter is always 30. What tastes like viscous honey? Younger the brother. What feels like vicious migraines? Malignant the tumor. Oh, helpless village parents, whose peasant spells can ward off the evil eye, but not the petrified look and the pleading eyes of your dying son, as he lay in intensive care, hooked up as he was to the glowing screens in the narrow, humming cell of a room at the Mass General in Boston. Brute mortality, sweet, enigmatic Meli, as in melancholic Lucretius, coating the lip of the metaphorical cup with honey, with lyric honey, to make his bitter medicine palatable, distilled as it was from vintage stoic wormwood. How many cells of how many honeycombs does it take to fill a gallon jar of Meli? Enough for the hives to glow in 2 places, as if the honeybees of Akuvos had flown to Winthropos. The Kennedys love the Greeks. Elizabeth mentioned Dialogos, my book of translations, and I thought it was right to read this poem tonight. It's my translation of a poem from the Russian of Osip Mandelstam, who died in the Soviet gulags. It's called As I Was Washing Myself in the Dark. As I was washing myself in the dark, washing outside where the ice cold water kept spilling over the rim of the barrel. The evening stars against the horizon glistened like salt on the blade of an axe. As I was washing myself in the dark, I saw the locked gate that couldn't keep out the menacing look of my surroundings once it had entered my state of mind. Soon the weavers will weave a new pattern from anything they can get their hands on, looming there in the near future. No matter what fabric they happen to stitch, I don't think the seams will ever be finer than a single line of honest speech. Salt of the earth and stars of the sky, dissolving now in the water's reflection, this briny water that keeps turning blacker, like some purer shade of appalling death. As if our lips had already tasted what's steeped in the salt of worsening luck. As I was washing myself in the dark, washing outside where the ice cold water kept spilling over the rim of the barrel. The earth edged closer to truth and terror. I'll read two more. This one is called Birds in Cemeteries. It must be the shade that draws them, or else the grass. And it seems they always alight away from their flocks, alone. It's so quiet here, can't help but hear their talons clink as they hop from headstone to headstone. Their sharp, inquisitive beaks cast quizzical glances. The lawn is mown. The gate is always open. The names engraved on the stones and the uplifting words below the names are lapidary as ever, but almost never even a chirp from the birds, let alone a wild shriek as they perch on a tomb. And then they fly away, looking as if they couldn't remember why it was they came, but we're doing what our souls are supposed to do on the day we die, if the birds could read the words. The last poem I'm going to read is called Umbrella. And when I was growing up, it was kind of a universal superstition that you didn't open an umbrella in the house. I don't know if that's still viable. Umbrella. Umbrella. Even now, just seeing one with its dripping canopy open and left to dry on the floor of a front hallway is bad luck and gets me tense as the glinting tips of its outstretched struts. Just calling it, as the dictionary does, a bell-shaped collapsible shade, invokes my father's black umbrella, and how it sprang into shape with the push of a little red button under the handle. And from the way my mother came storming into my childhood room, you'd think the full-blown curse of Atreus had been loosed upon our house. The house my father blessed with a basil leaf. Long before Horace taught me that Jove can drive his thundering chariot and galloping steeds across a perfectly clear blue sky, Greek dread was the air my superstitious parents breathed, as did that row of elderly women who always dressed in mourning and sat at the front of our church. And if you didn't watch out, those black-shawled crones could give you the evil eye, or so we were told. Fear hubris, fear sickness, fear the way they muttered your mira, meaning your fate, is already written, Krameni. Same old ancient chorus. It all comes back with a sudden bracing whoosh, like holding a plastic shield against a deluge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, James. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Grolier. I'm blessed to be reading tonight with David and with George, two masters. The Mouth of Uncle Max. The brassy glare of a gold tooth socketed in his lower gum branded the Yiddish my Uncle Max expelled. His nugget tooth exhibiting an alien luster. His hands gesticulating his sounds in the living room. His clack grating that sheeny element into my food. And when he gloated or argued, I could see the ridges of his enamels and amalgams crated all the way back to the back of his mouth. His sounds conspired with the tribal radio station my father dialed up on Sunday mornings, with the chatterboxes in the stores, with the pitch of the fruit and vegetable peddler guiding his nag by the throat latch down the streets of our neighborhood, with the supplicant shrai of the old man in the alley, cash clothes, offering money for old clothes and rags, his Yiddish English clamoring into my ears. My mother calls down, asking him up to our apartment. What are these sounds? What are they doing to me? Why must I protect myself from this old world seeping into me, from these sounds snaring me, from that alloy teeth implanted in Uncle Max's mouth? 2, I can't understand why Yiddish has such a hold on me. Ich kann nicht verstehen, was Yiddish hat as a Angab auf mir. Yiddish, what did I run away from when I ran away from you? What did I embrace when finally in my 40s I embraced you? You are more than speech. You are what went into the making of me. I can see again Uncle Max's tooth, how gross and garish it was, how repulsive and conjuring, how primitive and configured. That brazen gold that threatened me, that seized me, that glary yellow grinder that flashed way back in his mouth, where accents hive, gauche habits thrive, and the old world lurks. That source and cruncher of sounds, that grasp, that orcha. To a woman remembered, I will die just as you will. You and I, unknown to ourselves and to each other, when ears can't hear or tongue make sounds. Even a young poet who longs to lay a girl, as I did you, will in time lack everything. All shapes will disappear from my mind, even the ghost of you lingering there. Your voice, coming down the stairwell. Is that you, Richard? It's me. Memories, versions, voices come to an end. The stairs, rooms, buildings, all gone too. You on the third floor, buzzing me in. Reading book 11 of Paradise Lost. On an evening that means a lot to others, Christmas Eve, I am moved to tears by Angel Michael's herbal cures of Adam's eyes, removing a cataract induced by Satan, opening Adam's eyes to the world he is about to enter since he's been expelled from paradise. Milton inventing this visionary moment, though his own eyes have gone dark beyond all help, while Adam is invited to open his. How come I hadn't seen the pity of this moment the times I'd read the poem before, seen Milton's presence in his genuine gift to Adam? And now this evening means something further, something other than an evening that means a lot to others. One dearer to me now, because I see Milton anew, hear him anew, the scene stemming from rue and eyebright, myself entranced by the plants Milton employs, found in formulary and psalm. Northeast Corridor. Once, riding Amtrak from Boston to Penn Station to read my translations in New York, I saw the ghosts of Yiddish poets wearing furrowed mantles and coming out from behind trees somewhere north of New Haven and asking me to translate them. And I wrote a poem about their emergence and their approaching the train and letting me know they gave me sanction. Now, I imagine, they come from the woods again and invite me to join them, to go back among the trees with them. Read your poems to us, their leader urged. And because you have translated our poems into English, we will return the favor and translate your poems into Yiddish, and you will become part of our Bruderschaft. And thus, that very language you once wanted least to do with now becomes that language you need most of all. Come, talk with us. Their leader, whom I knew had an elegant English because we chatted once in a restaurant on East 86th Street near Yevo, extended his invitation in the Yiddish, trusting I would understand, as I once did over our coffee. And the gravelly, claimant, alien voices of the old men of my childhood changed into the leader's kind offer. Come, he invited me again. Come with us, back into the woods where you can talk with us. Komm mit uns zurück in Wald, wo du kannst reden mit uns. And as I followed the others, moving deeper into the woods, their mantles changed into the barks of trees. Out at the Cape, smiling on the steps leading down to the lawn where the plastic clothespins spring clip nothing accept themselves to the vacant line, I suddenly saw those wooden clothespins, smooth-grained, fork-legged, and derby-headed, that my mother used to wedge into the clothesline, a braided rope, also good for making knots, or playing jump rope, or grabbing in tug of war. That line she strung out near the pulley, mounted above the gray clothespin bag, wide and deep as a sewer's sack. Then those wooden cleft figurettes disappeared, and I returned to staring beyond the volleyball net at the foliage that marked the end of our property. Leaves and brake and bush and stems and viney things so dense I couldn't see through it all. Nothing but the wilding wall of green with gaps of darkness. I was looking for the answer to my question. What should I do now? Was I through now? Was I out of poems? Have I lost my powers? Time now to lie down and die? And all I did was sit, staring at the silent green. And I'll conclude with this one, the last one in the book. Love lines in old age. For Bert Stern. If you were a woman, I would steal you from your husband. Or if we were gay, I would have an affair with you. But we're two old Jews, straight in a manner of speaking, who dutifully got their PhDs, taught, had kids, and kept their passion for poetry, reading it, writing it. I love Whitman a bit more than you do. You love Blake a bit more than I do. But we both stick by Yeats and Wordsworth and Hardy. You're drawn to the Buddha. I'm still entwined in the Jewish Bible. You smile at the way the grass bends when an army invades, and the way it bends when that army retreats, as you read in Dufu. While I am stuck on the hot coal the angel's hand lays on Isaiah's lips. We hold our love in our differences and in our contradictions. To think, I have lived long enough to fall in love with a guy in old age. So this is Calamus, without the love flesh swelling. You keep me going, I keep you going. Poetry keeps us going. We gas each other up, pump up each other, feed off of each other. It's like Whitman rocking in his chair on Nichols Street in Camden, and his long look for a camarado finally shows up, and they go at their gabbing just as we do. The achievement of Pound, that son of a bitch. The Red Sox, the beauty of Tennyson when he's lost his faith. Fascism in America. David Ferry's gorgeous translations. The women's movement. What is free verse? How differently we write. You patiently waiting for nature to reveal itself. I wrestling with a night spirit until I am bent into a new name. And then sometimes you write a bit like me, and I a bit like you. How we both adore the necks of Degas women, and how we still ache over the fall of Delmore Schwartz. And we tell each other our dreams, like exchanging poems, mine of a carboy seated in the corner of an empty room, crated so as to safeguard its corrosives. Yours of sitting on a porch in your beloved Adirondacks, watching squirrels' tails divest and a plumed scamper turn into a naked scuttle. Despite lagging energies, the blanks, the slippages, how long I have waited for you. I feel like a kid skipping home from kindergarten and breathlessly telling his mother, I made a new friend today. We're going to be friends for life. He invited me over. I invited him over. His name is Bert. Thank you.
George and Richard, thank you very much for that exceedingly beautiful readings. Now we are honored to be able to play a new recording from David Ferry, and we want to wish David a happy birthday. It's his birthday later this week. Happy birthday, David. These are 5 poems that were recorded by Mitch Manning, one of David and George's students, as a matter of fact. So here we are.
The guest Ellen at the supper for straight people. The unclean spirits cry out in the body or mind of the guest Ellen in a loud voice, torment me not. And in the fury of the unclean hands beating the air in some kind of unending torment. Nobody witnessing could possibly know the event that cast upon her the spell of this enchantment. Almost all the guests are under some kind of enchantment of being poor day after day in the same body, of being witness still to some obscene event, of listening all the time to somebody's voice whispering in the ear things divine or unclean in the quotidian of unending torment. One has to keep thinking there was some source of torment, something that happened someplace elsewhere, else unclean. One has to keep talking in a reasonable voice about things done, say, by a father's body to or upon the body of Ellen in enchantment, helpless still by the unforgotten event, enchanted still in the old forgotten event, a prisoner of love, filthy Ellen in her torment, guest Ellen in the dining hall in her body, hands beating the air in her enchantment, sitting alone, gabbling in her garbled voice the narrative of the spirits of the unclean. She is holy, the possessed one of the unclean. Maybe the spirits came from the river. The enchantment entered her, maybe in the Northeast Kingdom. The torment, a thing of the waters, gratuitous event, came up out of the waters and entered her body and lived in her in torment and cried out in her voice, It speaks itself over and over again in her voice, cursing, maybe or not, a familiar obscene event, or only the pure event of original enchantment from the birth of the river waters, the pure unclean rising from the source of things in a figure of torment, seeking out Ellen, finding its home in her poor body. Her body witnesses, so also is her voice, of torment coming from unknown events. Unclean is the nature and name of the enchantment. The proselyte, the iambic pentameter is its versification. A man the unclean spirits had got into the parish hall on Tuesday night. The unclean spirits poured out through his skin in the form of filth and cried out in that form, and cried out in the form of how he went rapidly back and forth, as if for many errands to one person and another, or to nobody, up and down the parish hall, little trips back and forward rapidly, like a wasp or fly, hysterical with purpose, battering himself against our difference. There was authority in him as he went, carrying his message to one of us and another who had condemned him to this filth and this unavailing rage, and the little voice crying out something in the body's cage. The voice was pitifully small, as if from someplace else, or time of childhood, say, or country other, telling us something no one in the parish hall could possibly understand. Rabbinical, as if of ancient learning, knowledgeable and unintelligible. The proselyte, the morphemes were uncouth. His body was clad in the black of the unclean spirits. And then he was going away from the dining room, a wasp trapped in a house, desperately trying, flying from one room into another room, how to get out of the place in which it was, or else to carry the message to some place other. He went to the phone on the wall of the hall outside and said into the phone whatever it was he was saying, and tore the phone out of the wall and said to the wall, telling it things in the little far-off, doleful insect crying voice in that other language. And then he went to the outside door of the, as then said, to the outside door of the parish hall, whatever he said to us on the phone on the wall, and then he was gone away into the night. Movie star Peter at the supper for street people. The style of form of concealment, the way style is. His manners seemed a parody almost of manners movie star of bygone days. Strangely elaborate, highly stylized manners, complicit with his fame and with your praise, looking towards you and then away from you, star-like, movie star-like, a dance routine, the walk, almost a glide or elegant shuffle, always on the verge of veering away, circling away and over to the other side of the frozen skating rink that he was on. A dancer's courtesy, the courtesy, I mean, of the dancer to the audience, flirtatious and familiar, only for you, and entirely impersonal and withheld. All of the above, though, makes the point, maybe misses the point, because it seems to say he knew about what he was doing or what the style was for, and nothing let us be sure that this was so. A look on his face of amusement, as if he knew a secret that he shared with you and yet kept to himself, as if it only showed the cryptogram, but wouldn't provide the key to read it with. But could he read the code? One night, late at night, as we were driving home from having had dinner out in Boston, we saw him figure skating through Charles Street Circle, right through and among the circling lights of cars, as if with champion skill on thin ice whirling, oblivious to the astonished blaring horns, as a dancer or skater seems, while dancing to the music that we hear, oblivious to the music that we hear, and listening to some other music heard from somewhere else. So Peter moved like a dancer or skater through and among the dangerous, outraged cars, untouchable and untouched, and moving to the music of something else from somewhere else. The music, maybe, of his madness, was it? It was as if he skated in solitude and glided whirling on a lonely tarn, far out away from everything there is. At the street corner, after Rilke, Das Lied des Zwerges, Song of the Dwarf. Maybe my soul's all right, but my body's all wrong, all bent and twisted. It's this that hurts me so. My soul keeps trying to straighten my body out. It hangs on my skeleton, frantic, flapping its terrified wings. Look here. Look at my hands. They look like little wet toads after a rainstorm's over, hopping. Maybe God didn't like the look on my face when he saw it. Sometimes a big dog looks right into it. She speaks across the years. I heard of it. If having gone so far from one another on distant ways, if across all the ways and all the time, you know me still, who was your partner in those days, in all the sorrow. There's something after all is left of it all. Where's she who loved you, waiting for you now? Here in the civic garden, just as before. Here we're in memory. Once again, we're meeting in the dusk as before, and after all the sorrow, beside the black original river flowing. There were those moments. I remember there were those moments, and you, so closed up in yourself, were able with me to be, if just for one moment, less so. There was something good about that for you, for me. The time went by as if there was no trouble. I remember how you showed me all those places. I thought this was my country. I had never visited or seen as through your eyes. The open fields and the hidden places, looking from concealment out over the sea. Was it in springtime then? Was it in summer? The nightingales and the other birds were singing, and the fragrance of the trees was all around us, and the hyacinths, the violets, the tulips, green ivy on the house walls, green the shadows of the pathways where we walked together. Then thinking it all, after all, was possible. It wasn't that you were different than you were, nor I than I, but that we were, for a while, all right together in our separate selves. My book is the rich man and Lazarus, the poor man. I've renamed the poem Lazarus. It's about the backyard of our house in Ellery Street in Cambridge that we were living in then, and there was a street person in the neighborhood who sometimes slept in the alley between our our backyard and the Orson Welles movie theater that was then there. Lazarus. The dog-headed well man sleeps in the back alley, behind the fence with bittersweet adorned. In the corner of the garden over near where the viburnum flowers or fails to flower, depending on whether or not we water it. Many times over again it has survived. The leaves are homely, crudely rough cut, with a texture like sandpaper, an unluscious green, virtuous in look, not really attractive. Like Kant in Lear, plain spoken, a truth teller, impatient with comparison as with deceit. The wild man sleeps in the maple shaded alley, have hidden behind the garden fence, behind the wooden garden seat, weathering gray, in the corner of the garden over near where the Orson Welles movie theater used to be, from which in former days you faintly heard the voices of the great dead stars still vying in rich complaint, or else in exaltation of meeting or farewell, in rituals of wit or mastered, or in ecstasy of woe beyond the experience of saints. In the alley between the yard and the old theater, the wild man is covered with leaves and clad in the bark of our indigenous flourishing trees, elaborately inscribed and decorated with the names of heavenly pity. There he sleeps in the freedom of his distress among abandoned containers of paint, eggshell, and off-white tanks, both raw and burnt, vermilion, pinks and rose, purples and blues, and other hues and shades. Close by the tangled roll of wire screening under a scribbled hieroglyphic sign.
Thank you for three beautiful readings tonight to David, George, and Richard. We have time maybe for a couple of questions. If Joe would like to answer some. And you guys, George. Yes.
I want to know that James arranges these poetry. So happy to bring such wonderful readings. So we should thank him.
It's all thanks to the Mankiti family and the poets that make these wonderful events happen. So we give a hand to Carol for Good, Richard, want to go to the front? And sit down till we have chairs. my question is, how did the two of you first meet? If you could speak into the microphone, that way the Zoom people can hear too. That'd be great.
We had a mutual friend, and we still do, Kathy Jackson, who was a poet, but instead of certainly a painter, who lives in New York, and she brought us together. That's how I reckon it. Did you?
That's exactly right. And she was so smart because there were so many ways that Richard's work and my work intersected. And you know, the work he did with the Yiddish and the work I did with the Greek, and a sort of similar upbringing in ways, working class, and our love of literature. So it was, I think, right from the get-go, we felt that affinity.
That's a good word. Yeah. Thanks.
Marcia?
Can you say, Richard has talked about escaping from Yiddish. I'm curious about if you could say something about the moment in which you returned, and maybe for George, if there was a parallel relationship, escape from, I don't know, from Greek, and maybe a particular moment.
I think about it. And I think about it. And I don't know. Simply, I can describe it, but it's still holding. It's the return of the repressed.
Yeah, I think for me, it was when I was a kid, we had to go to Greek school 3 days a week. As the Catholic kids went to CCD and the Jewish kids went to Hebrew school. And we kind of despised it because we didn't want to be going to school all day long. But then I think when I got into graduate school and I realized that I wanted to get a PhD, and my material was going to be the folk songs that I heard from my parents and my grandparents, and how those connected to Greek literature. So I suddenly felt it was connected to my own poetry, it was connected to my own scholarship, and you know, it came back to me in I think a guiding kind of force. I certainly didn't feel that when I was younger. I was more trying to get away from it and be like the other kids and all of that.
Is your poetry autobiographical?
It isn't. Sometimes I think what actually happened didn't really happen. But actually happened. It's all biographical and then some.
That's a hard question. It's a great question. I think, you know, for me, when it's sort of personal autobiographical, it doesn't work as well. But there has to be something private. It gets a little bit deeper than the personal. And I don't know exactly where that's taking me, but it's the source of a poem. So it's never literally, you know, an autobiographical thread that I can follow. And it's more how one line is leading to another line. Some kind of private music that I'm hoping will have a common root.
I was just going to say, in a way, I kind of hate to interrupt the spell of the reading with questions because it was a wonderful reading.
Thank you.
For Richard, I have a question for you. A lot of your work seems to like address your relationship to Yiddish. I'm wondering if there's a way in which Hebrew or biblical verses come into your work or your relationship to, I don't know if you follow the Bible or Kabbalah.
You're asking what? I'm not hearing.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
didn't catch it.
I'm wondering if Hebrew also comes into your work, and like biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew, or it's more specifically Yiddish.
It wasn't Hebrew for me, and it will never be. Because Yiddish was what was on the table. Hebrew was some.
She also asked about biblical verses and how they play into your poetry.
No biblical verses. Even when I went to Hebrew school, it was the Sunday classes. Stories, especially.
You have some wonderful poems about the biblical characters,
Yeah.
retelling of the biblical stories.
And you have poems about mythical figures. Somewhere they meet.
Yeah.
On that note, let's give the poets another round of applause. Books for sale over here. The poets will be signing books. Thank you, everybody, for attending. If you could bring your chairs and put them up against the wall, that would be great.
Yeah.
Didn't want that question.
Grandparents actually came over.
Another beautiful reading.
They made up words that were different from words that rose in Greece.
Thank you. Especially the last one of your rest.
Right.
You don't live
No, I don't.
That's a poet as well.
I'm a poor reader too. But, I do what I can. I'm working on
Translating it?
no.